I think in our organisation, it is appropriate that after Francesco Javier's introduction, that we start with, I give you a presentation, an introduction to the End User Advisory Group. It is very important to us that we are led by and advised by the end users. We've got a number of different things that we see as principal to driving what we do. First of all, we set out to be very much driven by the end users, so that the focus is very much what our requirements are as carriers, what our real world perspective is. So our emphasis is in delivering something that is usable, industrial strength, to us as end users. Having said that, the thing that probably will emerge through a lot of what I want to say that is just as important as having good, solid industrial strength code is the opportunity to do learning by doing. As carriers, this is a whole new ballgame. This is a whole new world of automation. We're entering into complex, difficult space. And it's unlikely that we or our suppliers are going to get this right first off. The opportunity to get in our hands dirty, get involved with the development process, we see as being really important to understanding and getting right the automation once we actually are running it for real in our networks. So of those two objectives, and they're very much interrelated, we're clear that both of these are really important. So as an end user advisory group, we give vision, direction to the project. And to some extent, that probably comes in two slight parallel paths. So we're going to give direction to the immediate release. Requirements, prioritization, that is as much feedback, and so we're reactive to what is seeing, oh well, we may have a conflict here, which is the priority. That's one side. The other side is establishing clear long-term vision of what we're trying to achieve. The other thing that we very much understand and want to maintain, as Francesco Javier has said, is we've set out with a clear focus, and we'd like to try and maintain that focus. And that probably means we can't be all things to all people. So that we want to maintain a clear focus in delivering this a real-world industrial strength orchestrator that is testing the standards, that is working with the standards, and is real to us as carriers, that we can understand how we can work into our much more complex, wider systems. So just to sort of open that up a little bit on why in all those objectives do we as a bunch of carriers then see, well, why open source? And I think just to sort of pick up on two particular things. The code itself is potentially really useful on two routes. One is through our traditional suppliers. It gives us a visibility of what's going on. But there's also an awful lot of what we do at the moment that's broadly in this space that is in-house or bespoke developed. And open source is a very natural fit or extension to that in-house development. We're able to absorb it and build it in, possibly with some of the external support that can go with that, but we don't necessarily need in our environment that's already an in-house bespoke environment, worry about buying COT systems. So open source is a relatively straightforward fit there. But then, as I was saying, this is also a very strong way for allowing us to understand how we integrate, how we make use of the standards, how standards are going to transform into changing our operational processes. As I say there, a lot of the standards at the moment, if you look at them, they're lengthy. It's quite difficult, indeed sometimes very difficult, to understand exactly how some of our operational processes are really going to work encoded in the detailed parameters and some of the standards. we've got the opportunity to really see that in practice, get our hands dirty, run some real software, experiment, run our own demonstrators, and really understand how the standards are generating real automation. So that to some extent then leads on to, well, what is our long-term vision? Our long-term vision is automation. Automation across the full life cycle. So that covers the design and development of whether network services, VNFs, and so on, their onboarding, their registering in catalogs that can be then used for instantiation. It then goes on to the full life cycle of particular instances, and then their in-life service assurance and so on. Ideally, we would like automation across all of this. But this to some extent is where we get realistic. This is the value of being open source. Particularly, let's take the onboarding. Is it ever realistic that we are just simply going to take a package from a vendor and push a button and it will automatically ingest, come into the catalogs where we push the second button and we start getting instances in the network? That's certainly not where we are today. If you take Francisco Javier's little diagram of the diagram of what an NSD looks like today, and that's a fair summary of most people's experience. There's a lot of handcrafting needed to onboard VNFs. So we're realistic. That's the vision. It would be lovely to get it automated, but we want to be practical. This is the real opportunity of doing the learning by doing, actually understand what's involved today with the tools we've got today, where are the things that we're having to do a lot of crafting, what can we do to automate them, or are these things that it's just, in the next foreseeable future, just not practical to automate, in which case, let's understand that, and let's put the toolkits for doing the manual bits and make those as efficient as possible. It's across all the layers. So we're not just talking about onboarding network services and VNFs. We're also looking at what the VIMs are doing in terms of onboarding, instantiating virtual machines. What SDN controllers are doing to instantiate, automate the construction of virtual links. So it's across the whole lot. And what we also note is, and this is quite a strong discussion we had last week, is a lot of this ends up being policy driven. So when you automate, what you're doing is creating policy which sets constraints on automation engines. So policy starts becoming really important to understand what policy is being applied where. Policy is what you take from the people who are doing this manually today, and that's what you take out of their minds and put into the automation system. And as I say at the end, this is very much a heterogeneous world, and actually being able to break it down into these different bits of the timescales, across the different timescales of the life cycles and across all the different layers really matters in order to be able to break it down and understand how different bits are going to fit in a heterogeneous environment. So just to and for those that were here this morning in information modeling, I apologize. This is the same slide, and I'll use more or less the same words. On the left-hand side, I've got heterogeneous in our OSS world. So a network service doesn't necessarily equal an end customer service. Very often we want to embed that and use that as a component in a wider service that will be put together and managed by our existing OSS, BSS. In other words, the NFV component, the network service, along with the MANO control, is just one component wrapped up, supplying a wrapped up service into our wider system. Exactly the same the other way round at the bottom of the stack. We want to make use of our existing services that are controlled by our existing OSS, BSS, make use of those as components, particularly virtual links between NFV POPs. We want to make use of those within the NFV environment. So in our OSS world, it's heterogeneous. We also then extend that when we say, actually, we're going to have a whole lot of X as a service, VNF as a service, network service as a service, infrastructure as a service. Then you've got to have that interface that is supplying that service, not just doing life cycle, it's now got to handle all aspects of service, including the resource performance, in-life reliability and service assurance. All of those parameters all have got to get wrapped up into the service interface. Just to sort of trying to illustrate some of the learning by doing. What we tend to face today, and it's a bit of a caricature, but in some ways I'm just trying to capture the idea. We have a world of standards, and we're as operators very much engaged in those standards. They provide standards into a systems development world, largely done by vendors today. They then give us packaged solutions, which we then build together in our network and we operate. However, what goes on in the system development is largely opaque to us. We don't get to see exactly what goes on because it's all part of the proprietary development. So in a very complex environment where we've got very complex standards, understanding how that flow through is going to work, that our engagement in standards really flows through to what we thought we were going to get by the time we come to operate things as a service provider, is very hard to guarantee. The great strength of an open source environment is twofold. Firstly, is a feedback flow. And give or take Escher and a slight, don't question the physics of the diagram, the point is that that river flows back on itself, so that we are constantly got feedback. We can go from our experience right back to the standards through development and flow it through. Second point is it's entirely open. We can see into it all the way through, so that our understanding and our guarantees that we can get to a point where we really have got what we thought we were going to get and we're going to operate it successfully, that's very much strengthened by it being involved in open source. So these are some of the things that we, as part of that feedback, believe we're able to do. Francisco Javier sort of highlighted some of them too, particularly things like our experience in using the network service descriptor, the VNF descriptor. We're able to feedback that rapidly based on what we're doing. Another one that we've seen, that the controlling of the resources, understanding how resource management as an overall end-to-end process relates to some of the parameters that are in the descriptors, isn't entirely obvious. And also then, as you then want to say as well, actually I need to have some service level resource parameters baked in. Well, it's not even clear that we've got any well-defined parameters that cope with that problem as yet. So these are some of the things we believe we're able to provide some clear and rapid practical feedback. And the final one, again, Francisco Javier mentioned, that one of the things that we think we can start dealing with and looking at and embedding right up front is some of the security issues. And I've highlighted two different aspects of security. First one is normal sort of hygiene things, so the resource-based access control authentication, so that we've got all of that embedded right through the system day one. The other one, in some ways, that's relatively straightforward, really important. The other one, though, to some extent is more interesting from an intellectual point of view. What we're doing now is automating things. There's a strong sense of security embedded in the validation we can do during the onboarding processes and during the instantiation processes. What I mentioned this morning in the information modeling is just as an example. We've got a template for a VNFD. It says go and make one. But if you change certain parameters to VNFD, it'll change its properties. That may break the network service to which it's a member. Should we not be marking what parameters of a VNFD should be immutable during its life versus which ones can be changed and still maintain the network service. That's actually an aspect of security, because it's the security of the network service is being assured by the integrity of the VNF during the VNF's life cycle. So there are a whole set of aspects of security that we believe that we are able to start dealing with and thinking about and gaining experience through by being directly involved with the development and the open source. So that's a quick view through from an operator's perspective, why we're involved, what we expect to get out of it. I think now hand over to the guys who've been really upfront with all the code, and I think hopefully we've got quite a lot of demonstrations and answer a lot of questions as to how this is actually going to work, how you can actually get hold of the code, get involved, run it for yourself. Thank you.